The sound came before the dawn did. I had lived my whole life in Emberich, and I had never once heard it, that high, clean ring of struck moon iron rolling up through the stone floors of the keep, through the soles of my boots, through the old brand on my palm that had been cold since the day my father set the crown on me. I came awake on my feet with my hand already reaching for a blade that wasn't there, and I stood in the dark of my chamber with my heart going like a hammer, because a dead thing had made a sound. The moon Anvil had not sung in 90 years. I knew that the way a man knows the color of his own eyes without ever having seen them. It was in every story the old ones told, in every apology my council made when the iron came out of our forges dull and brittle and our warriors' blades snapped against great-head steel. The anvil sang for the last true Luna, and when she died it went silent, and it will not wake for a lesser hand. I had heard it 1,000 times. I had stopped believing there would ever be a hand it judged worthy again. I had stopped believing a great many things. And now it was ringing. I did not call for guards. I did not wake the household. I went down through the keep alone in my shirt sleeves like a boy chasing a fox, down the long stair to the deep forges where the great hearths never fully die. And the closer I came, the louder the sound grew, not the flat clang of a hammer on cold metal, but a note, a held and living note, the way a bell holds its voice after it is struck. It filled the forge hall. It shook loose 90 years of dust from the beams. And beneath it, small and steady, was another sound I did not understand until I came through the arch and saw her. She was on her knees at the moon anvil with both her bare hands laid flat against the dark iron, and she was weeping, not from grief. I have seen enough grief to know it, and this was not that. She wept the way a person weeps, who has heard something they had waited their whole life to hear without ever knowing they were waiting. She was a scrap hand. I knew it at a glance. The soot ground so deep into her knuckles it would never come out, the leather apron worn through at the belly from hauling slag, the singed hem, the hands calloused thick as a smith's though no one had ever let her lift a hammer. The lowest of the forge folk, the ones who pump the bellows and rake the ash and are paid in bread. Her hair was tied back with a strip of hide and half of it had come loose and stuck to her wet face. She could not have been anything the world would call important. And the moon anvil was singing under her hands, as if it had been waiting for her since before I was born. She heard me. Of course she heard me. The whole hold could have heard me, the way my breath had gone. She snatched her hands back from the iron as if it had burned her, and the note began to fade, and she scrambled up off her knees and pressed herself back against the cold wall with her eyes huge and her chin up, ready to be struck. "I didn't take anything," she said. Her voice was low and even steadier than her eyes. "I was raking the night ash. I only touched it. I'm sorry, my lord, I'll go." The last of the ring died out of the air. I could not speak. I want to tell you I said something worthy of a king in that moment, something that met the size of it, but I did not. I stood in the arch of my own forge, and I looked at a soot-covered girl I had never seen before in my life, and I felt the brand on my palm, that old cold mark of my line that meant nothing to me and never had. I felt it warm. Warm the way iron warms when you slide it back into the coals. And behind my ribs, where my wolf had gone quiet and dutiful decades ago, something struck once, clean and ringing, like a hammer laid true to the anvil. I had heard the old smiths describe the bond that way, and I had never believed them either. "Do it again," I said. She stared at me. "The iron," I said, "touch it again." "My lord, I am not going to punish you." My voice came out rougher than I meant. "On my life. Touch it again." She looked at me a long moment, this girl who had every reason in the world to run, and then I will love her for this until I am ash, that she did the brave thing when the safe thing was right there. She stepped back to the moon anvil, and she laid one bare hand against it, and the whole hall filled again with that held and living note, and she looked at me across the sound of it with tears standing in her eyes and something like terror. Because she understood before I said a word that her small, quiet life was over. Her name was Elira. I did not learn it until the sun was up. Let me tell you what the moon anvil is, so you understand what she woke. Emberich is a forge kingdom. We are not the largest of the northern packs nor the richest, but for 1,000 years we were the strongest, and our strength came out of the ground and up through the fire. There is an ore in our mountains, moon iron, the old ones call it, though it is gray and dull as any other until it is worked right, and worked right it makes a steel that holds an edge no other pack could match and a temper that would not break. Our blades won us our borders. Our iron kept our wolves whole through winters that killed lesser packs, And moon iron cannot be worked right by an ordinary smith at an ordinary anvil. It must be sung. That is the plain truth of it, though it sounds like a child's tale. There is a resonance in the true moon iron, and it answers only to a certain blood, the lunasmiths, the old ones called them, women born once in a generation with the moon in their hands, who could lay palm to the great anvil and wake a note that ran through every bar of ore in the kingdom and made it willing. Under that song a smith could forge a blade that would not shatter and temper a wolf's failing heart back to strength. The moon anvil was the heart of it, the ancient dark iron block that every lunasmith in our history had woken, that fed the song out to every forge in Emberich. 90 years ago the last of them died. Her name is not written down anywhere I could ever find, which should have told me something long before it did. And when she died the moon anvil went cold, and no hand woke it again, and slowly, the way a strong man weakens without knowing it is happening, Emberich began to fade. Our iron came out brittle. Our blades broke. Our wolves grew smaller and our winters grew longer, and the great-eyed pack that had feared us for 1,000 years began to buy our old borders one dead season at a time. My father died believing the fault was in his own blood. My council brought me match after match, Luna after highborn Luna, and set each one's hand to the dead anvil, hoping the old song would rise. And it never did, not once, and I watched each of them fail, and I watched my own hope go out like a banked fire until I stopped letting them try. I took no mate. What was the use? The anvil had judged my whole line unworthy, and I had come to agree with it. A king who cannot feed his people's strength is only a man in a large chair. I was 34 winters old the night the anvil sang, and I had made my peace with a slow ending. And then a scrap hand who had never been allowed to hold a hammer laid her bare palm on the heart of my kingdom, and it knew her. By full light the forge hall was crowded and loud, and a lyra stood in the middle of it like a hare in an open field. I had sent for Osric first, my forge master, an old bear of a man who had served my father and my father's father, and who was the only soul in Emberich still alive who claimed to remember the anvil's song from his boyhood. He came down grumbling and stopped grumbling the moment he crossed the threshold, because the note still hung faint in the beams and he knew it. His hard old face broke open. He crossed the whole hall to the anvil and stood over it with his hands hovering above the iron as if over a sleeping child. And when a lyra, prompted by my nod, laid her hand to it once more, and the hall filled with the sound, the old man put his face in his hands and wept, and I understood that he had waited 70 years to hear it and had thought he would die still waiting. But not everyone in that hall wept. My war second came down at the noise, and I saw his face before he arranged it. Kell was a hard, clever, useful man, and I had trusted him with the defense of my western holds because he was better at it than anyone I had. He came in fast and took in the scene, the crowd, the old man weeping, the scrap girl at the anvil, and for just a breath before he mastered it, something crossed his face that was not wonder and was not joy. It was closer to a man watching a debt he thought forgiven come walking back through his door. I marked it. I did not understand it yet. But I marked it because I have kept my throne by marking the faces of clever men. "My lord," Kell said, smooth as poured tin, "the whole hold is talking of a miracle. Forgive me if I want to be certain before we crown a soot girl on the strength of one morning." He looked at a lyra the way you look at a coin you suspect is false. "Anvils have rung before under a strong enough arm, a trick of the iron, a warm night, a lucky knock. Before we let the kingdom lose its head over this," he spread his hands, "reasonable, reasonable, let her be tested properly. Let her be tested in front of witnesses who cannot be fooled." There was a murmur at that, and I saw the fear in it. My people had been disappointed for 90 years. They wanted this to be true so badly that they were afraid to believe it. Kell knew that. Kell was giving them a way to protect their hearts. It was a wise thing to say, and I hated him for it, and I could not refuse it. "Test her then," I said. They brought a bar of raw moon iron from the vaults, a length of the gray ore that had defeated every smith in Emberich for 90 years. That came out dull and cracked no matter how it was heated or beaten. They set it on a common anvil, and they gave a lyra a hammer, and I watched them do it, and I watched her face, and I understood that she had never in her life held a smith's hammer, and that they were setting her up to fail in front of the whole hold, and that Kell had arranged it so precisely and so kindly that no one could accuse him of anything but caution. Elira looked at the hammer. She looked at the gray bar. She looked for one instant at me, and I gave her nothing because I did not yet know how to help her, and that is a failure I have never fully forgiven in myself. Then she put the hammer down. "I don't know how to swing it," she said plainly to the whole hall, not ashamed, just true. A ripple of scorn went through the crowd, and Kel led it, and I felt my jaw tight. "But I don't think that's the part that matters." She stepped past the common anvil and back to the moon anvil, the dead one, the great one, and she laid both her bare hands on it, and she closed her eyes. The note rose. It rose, and it did not stop rising, and this time I felt it in the raw bar of moon iron on the common anvil across the hall. I saw it. I swear it before every ancestor of my line. I saw the dull gray of the ore warm from within. Saw a red heart wake in a cold bar that no fire had touched. Saw it soften and shine as if the song were a forge all its own. Osric made a sound I had never heard a grown man make. Elira opened her eyes and looked at what she had done and swayed on her feet, and I crossed the hall and caught her before she fell. And the moment my hand closed around her sooty wrist, the brand on my palm flared so hot I nearly let go. And against her skin I felt an answering heat, and I turned her small hand over in mine, and there on her palm, rising up out of the soot as if the heat had summoned it, was a mark. The mark of the lunar-smith. The moon and the anvil, the old sign, the one carved over the door of that hall and worn by every woman who had ever woken the great iron. It had been on her hand her whole life, and she had never seen it because it only shows in the heat of the song. The hall went utterly silent. "There is your test, Kel," I said, and my voice was not smooth at all. He bowed, but I watched his eyes go to that mark on her palm, and I saw that he already knew what it meant, and that he was already thinking 3 moves ahead of every other soul in that room, and that whatever crossed his face when he first came down the stair, that look of an old debt walking home, had just grown teeth. I want to tell you it was simple after that. It was not simple, nothing worth having ever is. I gave her the forge, not a servant's cot near it, the forge itself, the moon anvil and the deep hearths and old Osric to teach her the armwork she'd never been allowed to learn, and the run of the smith's hall as its mistress. The council balked. A scrap hand raised over high-born heads, they said, and half of Emberich agreed with them the first week, and all of Emberich had changed its mind by the second, because the change was in the iron, and no one could argue with iron. Began with a single blade. Osric had a bar of moon iron half-worked and abandoned. He'd been trying on and off for 40 years to force it into a sword, and it kept cracking at the temper. Elira sat by the moon anvil and woke the song and held it, and Osric worked at the common anvil in the light of it, and the old man drew a blade out of that stubborn gray ore that rang when he struck it, a long, clean silver ring, the sound of true steel, a sound Emberich had not made in 90 years. He carried it up to me still warm and laid it across my hands and could not speak. I could not either. It was the best blade forged in my kingdom in my lifetime, and it had been forged in an afternoon, and it had been forged because a girl I paid in bread had touched a dead thing and it woke. After the blade came the rest of it, faster than any of us dared hope. Under her song the moon iron gave, blades that would not break, plows and hinges and cauldrons that outlasted 3 of the old kind. And the deeper magic of it, the part the plain folk cared about most, a sick wolf. There was an old great wolf in my keep named Fen. He had been my father's, and then he had been mine since I was a boy, and he was dying the slow way old great wolves die when the pack's strength thins, his great heart failing, his breath a rattle, no longer able to climb the stair to lie by my fire. I had made my peace with losing him too. There was a great deal I had made my peace with. Elira found him one evening lying in the yard because he could no longer manage the steps, and she sat down in the cold mud beside him without a thought for her skirt or her station, and she put her hand on his gray muzzle, and she sang, not the anvil's song, just a low thread of a tune under her breath, but the same blood behind it, and old Fen's ragged breath eased. Just eased. He slept the first easy sleep he'd had in a season, and in the morning he climbed the stair, and he lived a full 1.5 years more and died at last by my fire the way an old wolf should. And I have never told anyone but you that I stood at my window and wept over a wolf, because a soot girl sat down in the mud and gave me back time I thought was already spent. That is when I stopped being able to lie to myself about what she was to me. It had struck me the first night, that ring behind the ribs, but a king learns to distrust the first strike of anything. So I told myself for a while that it was gratitude, and then I told myself it was the wonder of the iron, and then Fen climbed the stair and I stopped telling myself anything, because a man cannot argue with the way his whole self turns toward the sound of a woman crossing a courtyard. My brand warmed when she was near and cooled when she was gone, plain as a lamp lit and snuffed. My wolf, that dutiful old quiet thing, was neither quiet nor dutiful any more. It wanted to lie down in the doorway of the forge and never leave. I had rejected a dozen highborn Lunas at that same Anvil and felt nothing, and now a girl with soot in her knuckles had woken the whole dead heart of me along with the whole dead heart of my kingdom, and the two were not separate things. They had never been separate things. That was the truth the old ones knew and I had forgotten. The Anvil sings for the king's true mate. It had been telling me for 90 years that my line had no mate to find. It had not been cursing us. It had been waiting. I learned her story in pieces. Over the long evenings, I found excuses to spend in the forge. She had no name for her own blood. She had been left as an infant at a poor pack store 2 valleys south, a bundle in a basket, a scrap of hide, no note, no token but the mark none of them could read because it only wakes in the heat. They'd raised her rough and sold her north to Imberich's forges as a scrap hand when she was still a girl, because a strong child is worth bread. She had never questioned it. She had never had the luxury. When you are the lowest of the low, you do not ask why the world set you there. You only try to stay warm. But I could count, 90 years since the last Lunasmith died, and Alira was young, too young by far to be that woman, so there had been another between them, a daughter or a granddaughter of the old Ember Luna, born after her death and hidden deliberately. You do not leave the last heir of the most important bloodline in the kingdom in a basket at a stranger's door by accident. Someone had smuggled that child out of Imberich and buried her in Poverty 2 valleys south precisely, so that no one would ever find her and wake her hand. Someone had wanted the Anvil to stay dead. I did not tell Alira that thought at first. She was only just learning to stand upright in her own life. She did not need me handing her a betrayal to carry too. But I set old Osric to the vault records, the ones no one had opened in decades, and I began, quietly, to pull at the loose thread. And I began, less quietly than I meant to fall. There was an evening, I remember it whole, the way you remember the evenings that turn a life. It was late, and the forge had gone down to embers, and Osric had gone to his bed, and it was only the two of us, and she was sitting on the edge of the cold Anvil with her boots dangling like a child's, turning her own marked palm over in the firelight, still not quite believing it was hers. They used to laugh at me, she said, not bitter, just remembering, the other forge hands. Because I'd talk to the iron when I was small, I'd hum at it when I raked the ash, and they said I was simple. She huffed a small laugh. Turns out I was only lonely, and the iron was the only thing that ever hummed back. You are the least simple person in my kingdom, I said. She looked up at me, and the firelight was on her face, and the soot was still there in the creases of her knuckles the way it would always be, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in a hall built for beautiful things. You shouldn't sit with me like this, my lord, she said quietly. People are talking, a king and his scrap hand. It isn't it's going to cost you something, and I'm not worth the cost. I'm a bellows girl who got lucky with her hands, that's all I am. When the wonder of it wears off, you'll see it too, and I'd rather you saw it now before she stopped. Before I let myself hope, she did not say, but I heard it. I have led wolves into battle. I have held my dying father's hand, and I have buried men I loved. I do not frighten easily. But I was frightened then, of getting it wrong, of being clumsy with the one thing I had ever wanted that could not be won with a blade or a crown. Give me your hand, I said. She gave it to me, the marked one, the palm with the moon and the anvil on it. And I turned my own hand up beside it so she could see my brand, the old cold mark of my line, warm now, warm as a coal, warm as it had never once been in 34 winters until the night she woke. This has been dead my whole life, I said. My father told me it meant nothing but duty. I believed him. I believed I would rule a fading kingdom with a cold hand and take no mate, because the one thing that could have told me I had a mate to find had gone silent before I was born. I closed my warm hand around her marked one. You did not get lucky with your hands, Alira. You are not a bellows girl who happened to touch the right iron. You are the thing my whole line stopped believing in. And I am not sitting with you because the wonder of it hasn't worn off. I am sitting with you because you are the only fire in this keep that warms me, and I have been cold a very long time. She did not say anything, her eyes filled. But she did not pull her hand away, and she did not tell me again that she wasn't worth it, and for that night that was enough. I did not press her. She had been owned her whole life. I would not have her feel owned by me. I wanted her to choose it. I would have waited years for her to choose it. I did not have years, Kell saw to that. Here is what old Osric found in the vaults, and what I pieced to it from the Western hold accounts I had never troubled to read closely, because a king trusts his war second with the Western holds and does not check his sums. For 90 years, while Emberich's own iron came out brittle and our borders shrank, one family had grown steadily, quietly rich, Kell's. Not through the moon forges, those were dead, but through the plain iron trade with Great-Eyed, the very pack that had been buying our borders. Kell's grandfather had held the Western holds in the last Luna's day, Kell's father after him, and Kell after his father. 3 generations sitting astride the one road by which Emberich's ore left the mountains, taking their cut, growing fat on a kingdom's weakness. A weakness that made them necessary, that made the king lean on strong, hard, clever men to hold what a strong kingdom would have held on its own. A living moon Anvil ended all of that. A strong Emberich needed no middleman selling its dulled iron cheap to Great-Eyed. A woken Luna Smith made Kell's grandfather's arrangement, and his father's and his own, worth exactly nothing. And the last Ember Luna 90 years ago had not died of any sickness the records named. Osric found the true account behind a false one, a hunting accident that no one had ever looked at twice, because who looks twice at a grief that old? She had died on the Western Road, on Kell's grandfather's road. And her line had not ended that day, because she had a granddaughter, an infant, and someone loyal to the old Luna had done the only thing they could, taken the child and run, and hidden her so deep and so low that 3 generations of the family that profited from a dead forge never found her. Until she raked the night ash in the wrong forge and touched the wrong anvil. I understood then the look on Kell's face the first morning, the debt walking home. His whole house had been built on the moon anvil staying cold. And here was the one hand in the world that could warm it, standing in soot in my forge with a king falling in love with her. He moved before I could gather the proof to end him cleanly. Clever men always do. He did it, of course, in the reasonable way. He came to my council with a face full of concern for the kingdom. Great-Eyed was massing on the western border, this was true. I had the reports. It may even be that he arranged the timing of it, for he had the friendships there to do it. Great-Eyed was massing, he said, and Emberich's true strength was untested. One blade forged, one wolf healed, a girl the whole realm had crowned in its heart on the strength of a song. What if it was a fluke of 1 bar of ore? What if we marched to the border trusting in miracle iron that shattered on the first Great-Eyed shield? A king could not stake his people's lives on a soot girl's luck. Let her be tested, truly tested, once and for all before the whole hold and the border lords at the moon anvil itself. Let her forge with her own hands and her own song, the great moon blade, the king's blade, the war blade of Emberich that had not been forged in 90 years, and let it be proven on the anvil before witnesses. And if she could, why, then, no one would ever doubt her again, and we would carry that blade to the border and Great-Eyed would break on it. And if she could not, he did not say, he did not have to. If she could not, she was a fraud who had bewitched the king, and a fraud is dealt with, and a king made foolish by her is grateful to the loyal man who saw through it. It was a trap dressed as a triumph. If she failed publicly, he destroyed her and me both. And he was betting she would fail because forging the great moon blade was not the anvil's song alone. It was the song and a master smith's arm, years of it, the hardest work our craft had ever known, and a Lyra had been holding a hammer for a matter of weeks. He was betting on the one gap in her that everyone could see. He was a clever man. It was a clever bet. I could have refused, I was king. But refusal would have said, before the whole council, that I did not believe in her either. And Great-Eyed was massing, and my people did need to believe. And if I sheltered her from the test, they would always whisper that the miracle had been a lie the king was too besotted to see. Kell had built it so that the only way through was the way through. So I said yes, and I went down to the forge that night to tell her. And I found her already knowing, because news runs fast in a keep. And she was standing very straight by the cold moon anvil with her marked hands folded in front of her. And she was terrified, and she was not running. I can wake it, she said before I could speak. I can wake the iron, I've never once doubted that. But the forging Taurian, it was the first time she had used my name, and neither of us marked it then. The great blade, the king's blade, that's Osric's 40 years of arm, that's a lifetime of the craft, and I've had a month. I'll wake the anvil, and I'll stand there with a hammer I can barely lift, and I'll fail in front of the whole hold, and I'll take you down with me. He built it that way. He built it so my hands would be the thing that betrayed me. She laughed, and it cracked in the middle. The one part of me nobody ever trained, because nobody ever thought I'd be allowed to matter. I crossed the forge and took her marked hands in mine, and the brand on my palm burned bright against them. Then we do not do it his way, I said. Here is the thing Kell did not understand, clever as he was, because he had never once in his life sat down in the mud beside a dying wolf or hummed at cold iron out of loneliness. He thought the craft was the arm. He thought forging a blade was a strong man's work, and the song was only the seasoning. But Osric knew better, and so, in her bones, did Alira. The moon iron is not beaten into a blade. It is asked. Under the true song, the metal wants to become what it was always meant to be. A smith of the old way does not force it, she guides it, and the armwork matters far less than the world believes because the iron is doing most of the willing itself. A Luna smith with a month of hammer work and the true song in her blood could do what a master smith without the blood could not do in 40 years. Kell had bet on the gap that everyone could see. He had not counted the thing that could not be seen, that the great moon blade had never truly been forged by an arm at all. It had been forged by the blood, and the blood was hers, and it was the oldest and truest in the kingdom. We did not tell him that. We let him believe he had won. The morning of the test, the forge hall was packed to its old stone walls. The council, the border lords, the plain folk of Emberich crushed in at the arches. Great-eyed envoys sent for the occasion because Kell wanted witnesses from the pack he served in secret, wanted them to carry back word that the miracle had failed. Old Osric stood by the great hearth with his jaw set. Kell stood at the front with his hands folded and his reasonable, concerned face on, a man doing his sad duty. And Alira walked out into the middle of all of it in a smith's leathers, small and soot-marked and steady, and she did not look at Kell, and she did not look at the crowd. She looked at me, and I gave her this time what I had failed to give her that first frightened morning. I gave her everything. I let every soul in that hall see on my face exactly what she was to me, so that whatever happened next, no one could ever again call it a secret shame. My Luna, chosen before all of them. She turned to the moon anvil, and she laid both her bare hands on it, and the hall filled with the note. But this time she did not stop it, and she did not let it fade. She held it and she deepened it, and the sound grew until it was not coming from the anvil alone. It was coming from the walls, from the ore in the vaults, from the very mountain under us, 90 years of sleeping moon iron waking all at once at the call of the blood it had been waiting for. Men cried out. The great-eyed envoys went white. The raw bar of moon iron laid ready on the great anvil woke red from its own heart with no fire beneath it, softened, shone, willing. And Alira took up the great hammer that she could barely lift, and she did not lift it with her arm. She lifted it with all of it, with the blood, with the song, with the whole of what she was, and she brought it down, and the moon iron rang and rose to meet her, and folded like something glad to be asked at last. She did not fight the metal. She sang it, and it became. Stroke after stroke, and each one rang truer than the last, and the crowd fell so silent under the sound that I could hear her breath and the small sounds she made. And Osric beside the hearth was weeping openly and unashamed, because he was watching the thing he had given his whole life to, done at last, and done right, by the child someone had tried to bury. She drew the great moon blade out of the fire and the song, and she plunged it hissing into the quench, and the note rang out one last time, clean and enormous, and rolled up through the keep and out across the whole waking kingdom. And she lifted it, a long, pale, perfect blade, the finest steel Emberich had made in 100 years, forged in a single morning by a bellows girl. She turned and laid it across my hands, still warm, and the hall, the council, the lords, the plain folk, the pale, great-eyed envoys, every soul in it went to one knee. Not because I commanded it, because they could not help it, because they were in the presence of the returned strength of their kingdom, and they knew it in their blood. Kell did not kneel. He did the only thing a cornered, clever man can do. He tried to change the shape of the truth while everyone was still on their knees. A fine trick, he said loud into the silence, and I heard the crack under the smoothness now that I knew to listen for it. A fine performance, but a blade is proven at the border, my lord, not in a warm hall with a girl's song ringing in every fool's ears. Kell, I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I stepped down with the moon blade in my hand, and I looked at him, and I let him see that I knew. Where did the last ember Luna die? He went still. 90 years ago, I said into the silence, and now the whole hall was listening in a different way. On the western road, your grandfather's road, Osric has the true account, the one behind the false one. She did not die of any sickness. And her line did not end, because she had a granddaughter, an infant, who was carried out of Emberich in the night and hidden 2 valleys south in a scrap-hand's basket, so deep and so low that your house, the house that has grown fat for 3 generations selling this kingdom's dulled iron cheap to the very pack you invited here to watch her fail, never found her. I held up the blade between us. You did not want the anvil tested, Kel. You wanted it to stay dead. Your grandfather made sure of it once. You have spent this whole month trying to make sure of it again. He might have denied it, but the great-eyed envoys were in the room, and a betrayed pack talks, and I saw in his face the exact moment he understood that the friendships he had cultivated across the border were the very things that would hang him, that Osric had the road accounts, and the trade sums, and that the whole shape of 90 years had just become visible to every lord in Emberich at once. There is a particular silence that falls when a hall full of people all understand the same terrible thing in the same breath. That silence fell. I did not kill him. I want you to know that, because you are hearing this from a wolf king and you might expect blood. There was a time I'd have taken his head in that hall and been within my right. But there was a soot-marked woman standing behind me who had spent her whole life being disposed of by powerful men, and I would not make my first act as her chosen made a killing done to impress her. I stripped Kel of the western holds and every stone his house had gathered on a kingdom's weakness, and I gave it back to the kingdom, and I put him out beyond my borders to live the rest of his clever life as exactly what he'd made everyone else in Emberich live as for 90 years, small and cold and needing. It is a harder sentence than death for a man like that. He went, and the hall was well rid of him, and no one has spoken his name in Emberich since except old Osric, once spitting into the forge fire. Then I turned back to Alira. She was standing very still in the middle of the hall in her smith's leathers, with the whole kingdom on its knees around her and the truth of her blood ringing in every ear, and she had the look of a person who has been carrying a great weight for so long she does not know how to set it down. 90 years of hiding, a whole life of being paid in bread, and she still, even then, half believed she was a bellows girl who'd got lucky. I did not want to claim her the way a king claims a prize. I had watched too many powerful men decide her worth for her, so I did not name her Luna to the hall first. I went to her and I knelt. I, the king, in front of my whole court, went down on one knee to a scrap hand, and a sound went through the hall like wind through wheat, and I took her marked hand and turned it up beside my warm one, the 2 old signs together, and I asked her, out loud, so that the choosing would be hers and the whole world would witness that it was hers. You have woken my kingdom, I said. You do not owe me its crown for that. You owe me nothing. You have been owned your whole life, and I will not add my name to the list of men who decided what you were worth without asking you. I could barely get the last of it out. But if you will have a cold-handed king who has been waiting for you for 90 years without knowing your name, Alira, then stand beside me, and be my Luna not because the anvil sang, but because you choose it. She looked down at me kneeling there, and the tears came the same as the very first night, the tears of someone who has heard a thing they waited their whole life to hear without knowing they were waiting. Get up, she whispered. Kings don't kneel. This one does, I said, once for you. She pulled me up by both hands, my brand blazing against her mark, and in front of the whole kneeling hall she pressed her sooty forehead to mine, and she said, so quietly that only I heard it, I chose you the first night. When you told me to touch it again, and I was so afraid, and you looked at me like I was worth not being afraid for. I chose you then. I just didn't think a girl like me was allowed to. You are allowed everything now, I said. You always were. It only took the whole kingdom this long to hear it. And the anvil behind us still rang. We were wed in the spring at the Moon Anvil, because there was no other place in Emberich that mattered as much. She never lost the soot in her knuckles. She was Luna now. She had women who'd have scrubbed her hands soft and jeweled, but she wouldn't have it, and I loved her the more for it. Every morning she goes down to the forge before the sun, and every morning the whole hold wakes to the ring of the Moon Anvil rolling up through the stone, that high clean living note that a whole generation of us had never heard, and now cannot imagine living without. Children born in Emberich now will grow up thinking it the most ordinary sound in the world, the way the sound of your own mother's voice is ordinary. They will never know their kingdom was dying. That is the finest thing she gave us, I think. Not the blades, though the blades hold great-eyed well beyond our old borders now, and not old Fenn's extra year, though I will treasure it till I die. The finest thing is that our children will grow up thinking strength is ordinary, because a soot-marked woman 2 valleys south, hidden in a basket to keep her from ever mattering, walked into the wrong forge and touched the right iron and refused when a frightened king asked her to run. I still kneel to her. Once a year on the morning the anvil first sang, I go down to the forge before dawn, and I find her already there with her bare hands on the iron and the note filling the dark. And I kneel, and she tells me to get up. Kings don't kneel, and I get up, and we stand there together in the ringing until the sun comes. Last year, at the end of it, she took my hand and turned my palm up, the old brand warm as a coal, as it has been every day since the night she woke it. And she looked at it a long while, and then she looked at me, and she said the thing I will carry out of this life when I carry nothing else. "It was never cold, you know," she said. "Your mark, it wasn't dead all those years. It was just waiting for a hand low enough to reach it." Then she put her sooty hand in mine, and the anvil rang, and the sun came up over a kingdom that would never be cold again.